the 19th, Japan closed country where foreigners in Japan could not. During the 8th was changed. Western entered them of the world, not wanting the empire themselves, and their resources to be a great power. They rise in power, and 20th century they would go, and they would in East State be a rising up. However, their primary target for most of the first war victory for the Ghent, which a frisk for them, and the resources they won from their newly Manchurian puppet in their control of one further spread across East Asia, and wanted more with the continuum part.
On December 13th, 1937, General Matsu Iwan and Japan's Central Chinese Front Army entered the city of Nanjing. Over the course of 6 weeks, many atrocities occurred. Entire families would be massacred, with the elderly and infants being primary targets. Chinese soldiers would be hunted down and killed, then thrown in mass grave sites. Tens of thousands of women were raped and killed. And the only solace of all that was a few Western businessmen and missionaries stayed in Nanjing to create a safety zone. That was the only place where refugees could get some relief. While Japan initially respected this area, in January of 1938, Japan declared that order had been restored and decided to dismantle it. Killings still continued till the beginning of February.
As cliché as it may sound, the rape of Nanjing actually occurred for a myriad of reasons as opposed to a single factor. However, one of the most notable causes would definitely be the First Sino-Japanese War, which occurred from 1894 to 1895. It was throughout this particular war that the Japanese sought to take control over Korea, which at that point was under the possession of China. The result of the war was actually that Chinese authority became weakened in Korea. It diminished. In turn, this war can be seen as a sort of catalyst in terms of instigating tensions between Japan and China, which would go on for years, and many would suggest that it's actually persisted up to this point even. Another key factor would be Japanese schooling. Japanese schools taught that nationalism was extremely important, and the way to display this sense of nationalism would be through conformity, obedience, and loyalty to their nation. However, it was this same sense of nationalism that actually instilled the mindset that brutal activity and ruthless behavior was condoned and supported, even encouraged during times of war, because conquest was so important. Imperialization and colonization were part of Japanese identity at that point. And another factor, some would argue, was Chinese resistance, actually. Due to the fact that Nanjing was their capital, it was difficult for the Chinese troops to agree to actually surrendering. And some would say that this led to even more brutality against mere civilians, such as women and children. However, This is an opinion that some would argue with, as we will mention on the next slide, actually. Now, we will further elaborate on how Japanese nationalism was a significant cause of the Rape of Nanking. I will be speaking on the behalf of Jocelyn, who is unfortunately unable to present due to her contraction of COVID-19. We wish her the very best in terms of her recovery. In her words, another main cause that allowed for the event, the Rape of Nanking, to reach the gruesome extent that it did, was the strong nationalism instilled within the Japanese imperial soldiers. As discussed before, the environment within Japanese schooling was set a strong foundation for nationalism at a young age. Once already in the military, this sense of nationalism was only amplified. Due to Japan's difficult victory in the Battle of Shanghai, this encouraged the Japanese to make a vengeful attack at Nanking. The surrender of the Chinese soldiers was interpreted by the Japanese Imperial Army to be an act of cowardice. In the eyes of the Japanese, it was validation that the Chinese were less than human and deserved to be treated as such. The Japanese Imperial Army's radical sense of nationalism played a significant role in enabling them to find justifications within the atrocious acts they committed for 6 weeks. The Japanese army viewed the Rape of Nanking as a teachable moment for young soldiers. Superiors encouraged young soldiers to commit cruel acts in order to prepare them for future battles. The Rape of Nanking was seen by the Japanese army as further proof of their extreme dedication to their army and their country, rather than 6 weeks of violence that stained the streets blood red. One of the most notable aspects of the Rape of Nanking would be the statistics behind it. According to many reports, there were approximately 250,000 to 300,000 Chinese people killed during the Nanking Massacre, and this included men, but also women and children. As the name might suggest, around 20,000 women were sexually assaulted during the Rape of Nanking. All these horrendous acts occurred within a 6-week time period, very short for all the looting, killing, and rape that actually occurred. However, one thing that I've noticed is that statistics are highly variable depending on the different accounts of certain historians and officials. Nationality seems to play a very large role in these disparities.
Japan's goal of the battle was to seek revenge on China due to their unexpected loss in the Battle of Shanghai. They would use a great abundance of high-quality ammunition to overthrow the Chinese. Additionally, Chinese soldiers were poorly led and disorganized despite the fact they outnumbered Japanese forces. Chinese troops would suffer under the aggression of the Japanese attack, causing the remaining to retreat.
After the events of the Nanking Massacre, Nanking became part of the Republic of China under Wang Jingwei. It should be noted that this is a separate entity from the Republic of China under Chiang Kai-shek. This regime was a puppet government that only lasted until the end of World War II. After the Second Sino-Japanese War, General Matsu and his lieutenant Tani Hisao were tried and convicted by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East and were given the punishment of execution. To this day, Sino-Japanese relations are still tainted due to arguments over the nature of the massacre and to what extent it occurred.
The Chinese perspective on the genocide of Nanking features eyewitness accounts coming from Chinese survivors, American missionaries, and foreigners. Some of the common themes in their testimonies displayed were that the Rape of Nanking was Japan's attempt to terrify the Chinese into a fast surrender, from Jing Shenberg, an expert at Nanjing Normal University. And the Chinese government agrees that approximately 300,000 people were slaughtered during the Rape of Nanking. However, Japan has argued the right amount of people killed is around 150,000. The overall goal of Japan was to seek revenge upon the people of China due to their disappointment in the Battle of Shanghai. They would rigidly view the Chinese POWs as less than human, unworthy of life, and making surrender not an option. Japan would document their savagery, because ultimately the Japanese wanted to brutally harm the Chinese.